Will you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, thank you for your word that speaks to us into our lives, especially as we experience those occasions where fear and doubt settle in. May your word and your presence, and above all your grace, set us free. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. For you, Lord, are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Failure is not something that any of us intentionally seek out in life, but it is a part of life. In fact, there may be a sense in which perhaps it comes as a necessity. You're familiar perhaps with Theodore Seuss Geisel, who is better known to the generations as Dr. Seuss. When he wrote his first children's book, he shopped it by 27 different publishers. None of them thought that it was worthwhile of printing. I wonder what they thought when his books went on to sell 600 million copies worldwide. Oprah Winfrey, who was a familiar name in our times, was fired from her first television job. In reflecting back over her life, she realizes and has shared this bit of wisdom in commencement addresses, which she is called to do on a regular basis. She shared this most recently with folks at a Harvard University commencement. There is no such thing as failure. Failure is just life trying to move us in another direction. And then there's Michael Jordan, legendary player for the Chicago Bulls. And boy, would they like to have him back in his prime. But Michael observes of his own career, Hall of Fame career, I have missed more than 9,000 shots. I have lost almost 300 games. On 26 occasions, I've been entrusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. I have failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. Failure, the fear of failure, it is real. It comes into our lives. But I want you to know this, that failure, disappointing others, insignificance, loneliness, all these things that can stir up our fears are completely subject to the presence and to the grace of God. God who journeys with us, who lifts us, who guides us, and transforms failures into goals, especially God's goals for us, into goals achieved. There is no place that we can be, no situation, no circumstance, no set of factors confronting us, no success so great, no failure so deep that we can say, well, I have now entered the place where God is no longer with me. God's presence surrounds us no matter where we go. The psalmist expressed it so beautifully. You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. And then he posits all these places I could go. I could go, to the farthest point in the world. I could go to the depths of death. I could ascend to heaven. No matter where I go, Lord, you are there. Your presence surrounds me. The Lord is always there. It's one of those things that the prophet Jonah discovered as he was given a mission that he did not initially succeed at. Remember, the Lord told him, Jonah, you need to go to Nineveh and call the Ninevites to repentance. Jonah wanted no part of it, and so he fled. Went down to the coast, got on a ship bound for Tarshish, and said, I'm not going to Nineveh. I'm going to flee from the presence of the Lord. So he thought. And so the Lord fully observant of what was going on, caused a great wind to stir up the sea, and the waves came crashing against the boat, and the sailors were terrified, and they cast lots to find out who was responsible for our circumstance. And the lot fell to Jonah. They went to him and said, "What in the world did you do?" Oh, he explained. He said, "I was trying to flee from the Lord. I guess that didn't work out very well, did it? You're going to have to throw me into the sea for this to stop." Sailors heard that and said, "We'll go try rowing a little harder." But it didn't work, and they came back to him and said, "All right, you asked for it. It's not our responsibility." And so they threw him into the sea, and the sea became calm. But what do you do when you're Jonah, when you're thrown out of the boat into the water? Your life is in peril. You've disappointed God. But God, in God's grace and mercy, appointed a great fish to swallow him up, to keep him safe, to cough him up on the dry land and give him a second chance to say, "All right, Jonah, you going to go to Nineveh this time?" Yes. Jonah found out he couldn't flee from the presence of the Lord. He also found out that the Lord's presence means that there is an opportunity for another chance. As I think about the circumstances of our lives today, and we have realities, or near realities, that the ancients wouldn't have ever considered. One of the crazy thoughts that comes to my mind is I think about people that are signing up saying, "Yes, send me to Mars." Even those who say, "Yeah, I'll go to the moon." I'm thinking, gosh, what would happen if you go to Mars and you die on the way, or you get there and you're standing on the surface of Mars and something happens and you lose your life and there's Earth way in the distance. What happens? And then I think, all of creation, all of the heavens belong to God. There is no place that is inaccessible to God, for God is there. If we were to update the psalm, if I ascend to the surface of Mars, Lord, you are there. You are there. There is no place that we can go in this universe that separate us from the presence of God, nor from God's grace. God's grace is undeserved kindness, mercy, and love. Let's never forget that grace is grace precisely because we can't earn it. You can't buy it. You can't perform in such a way as to, deserve receiving it. Grace is grace. Grace combined with the presence of God is the antidote to our fears of failure, disappointing, insignificance, and loneliness. The great theologian Paul Tillich, in one of his significant sermons, described grace in this way. He said, "Grace strikes us when our disgust for our own being, our indifference, our weakness, our hostility, and our lack of direction and composure have become intolerable to us." In other words, grace comes to us when we can't stand ourselves anymore. God's grace comes, brings us to God, causes us to be able to respond in confession and turning our lives to God and toward following Jesus Christ. God accepts us. God is for us. If God is for us, really, let's be real about this. Who can be against us? Who can prevail against us if God is for us? Not that we are perfect. No, not by any means. But that work is God's work, and God does that with more grace to which we continue to respond. God's grace is amazing. But we don't just live in this isolated relationship with God to the, sealing off, the way of ignoring everything else and everyone around us. We're called to love God and to love one another. But so often we might experience, and we certainly hear it today, especially from those who maybe are seeking, who are searching for God and maybe have some partial view, but they struggle with the church, they struggle, to understand followers of Jesus Christ. And they might say something like this: well, I love God, it's people I can't stand. It's people that are the problem. Well, I'm sorry, folks, it's a package deal. We got to love God, and we've got to find a way to love one another. One of the things about our day and time that has made this more challenging is that we have so many additional means by which we can seemingly communicate with one another, but they're not as helpful as they might seem. I mean, it's week after week after week, if not even day after day, I see articles, I hear people talking about the things that are good about our world of social media, but also those things that really, really hurt. The good is we can stay in contact with pictures, with written updates. We can communicate in a way that would have never been possible. I mean, we have instantaneous pictures of grandchildren just born last Sunday. That's wonderful. But there's also the reality that 280 characters expressed in certain ways can destroy a person's spirit. Online reviews that are so out of proportion to the circumstances can devastate a business and do a lot of damage to the people that are trying to run that business. I was visiting with Amber in our office this past week, and I was saying, I like being able to go online and read about a restaurant or a hotel. What's good? What do I need to be aware of also? But some folks just go off and rant and rave. And it's like that filter that was instilled in us from generations ago, and maybe it came to us in the word of a mother or a grandmother or a grandparent or a father saying, if you don't have something nice to say, you best not say anything at all. Now, that's not to say that we should just stuff everything and ignore it. There are times when we need to speak up. There are things that matter that need to be addressed, but not everything. Not everything. We're talking about what it's like for waitresses or wait staff these days who, are maybe working lots of different tables, and there's the table in the corner that they're just fuming because their water glasses weren't filled every time they sensed within. Well, they should be by to fill my water glass right now. And as a result, there's a post that just rips in to somebody for no good reason. Folks, that just hurts. That hurts. And so, as we address the situation, it's critically important that we as the people of God be part of the solution. There are scriptures that speak to how we should carry ourselves. I mean, they are plain as day. They require no further elaborate theological explanation. Let's share this one together. Jesus' words in Matthew 7:12a. Will you read this with me? You should treat people in the same way that you want people to treat you. And a second one that goes with it from James 1:19b. Let's share this together. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to grow angry. Folks, it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple. I encourage all of us to keep these passages in our hearts, ready to be called upon when we ourselves need to be reminded of how God would have us live. There's a couple of other quick things I want to mention as we cover this pretty broad topic this morning. And that is that as we perhaps deal with fears of insignificance, that we claim those particular purposes, the calling that God has upon each one of our lives. That we seek meaning in life and live in that meaning. Out of the horror of the Holocaust, there was a psychotherapist by the name of Viktor Frankl, who himself was interned in a concentration camp. He, along with his wife perished. Frankl, though, survived, and during his time, while he was held captive, he became a keen observer of those fellow inmates who made it, or those who at least kept their dignity about them, and those who did not. And he found that those who could find a reason for living, typically persons who acted with love, compassion, or mercy despite the inhumane conditions, all had strength and resiliency in facing their circumstances. And they were much more likely to survive. In fact, Frankl found meaning in his own suffering. Not that God was deliberately intending the horrors of what was happening, but that out of this he found, yes, if I can help somebody else, if I can fulfill a purpose to help someone live through this horror, there is meaning, and with that sense of meaning and lived out purpose, there is life. And there is not a question of insignificance, because one's life is seen as being significant. And so he went on to survive and begin a whole school of thought around psychotherapy that's benefited countless persons during his lifetime and beyond. Folks, to each of us, it's critically important we discern, we ask questions, we ask of one another, what is God's purpose for me in this world? What is God's call? And then to align our lives, our practices, our habits, our disciplines in keeping with that call. The more that we know why we're here and encourage one another to know why they are here, the more we will find that our life has meaning. And where there is meaning, that question of insignificance vanishes. And lastly, the question of loneliness. All throughout the creation account in Genesis 1 and 2, we find that God created, and it was good. It was good. It was good. It was very good. But then we get to, and God saw that it was not good. What was that? That the human was alone. And so a helpmate, a partner was created. We are designed from the beginning to live together in community. Yes, there are times when we need to experience solitude, being apart, for prayer, for meditation. There are also times when we need to be in community. But there's never a call in God's economy to be lonely. We're called to be the body, here for one another. It is not good that we should be alone, and God has given us each other that we would not be alone. Throughout this series of messages, we have emphasized a specific tool, an acronym playing off of the word fear itself. And so to these questions of failure, disappointing others, insignificance, and loneliness, we apply this prescription. That we face our fears, those fears I just named, with faith. That we examine our assumptions about them in the light of the facts. That we attack those anxieties with action. And release our cares, our fears to God. God who is constantly present with us and provides to us our life-sustaining grace now and forever. Amen.